Hey Chester, can you hear me?
Innocent, I can hear you. Can
Wow.
you hear me? You
Yeah,
see me?
yeah,
Oh, okay, good.
great background right there. That's a very nice background you have.
Oh, thank you. It's a portrait. It's a photograph I made back in October in one of the tombs in Egypt.
Wow, wow, wow. This is really cool. This is really cool. So it's like, was Egypt, I think Ethiopia was the first place you started going to, right, to take the photographs.
Well, technically, yeah. I actually in '72, I think, so '71, I went to East Africa to Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda.
I see, I
But
see.
'73, I went to Ethiopia because I wanted to see what, I had the OAU was having their 10th anniversary meeting in Addis.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
wanted to see, the whole group of African leaders and what happened and how things go and what it looks like.
Yeah,
So that's what took me there. I went there, I think, in June or, and then in uh, sep- uh, September, I went to Egypt. And then the war broke out while I was there. The October
yeah.
war with Israel broke out. So I had to stay an extra three weeks.
I
But it
see.
was very good,
Yeah.
getting a chance to really develop an appreciation for both of those countries along the Blue Nile and
Wow.
appreciate that uniqueness.
Wow, wow, wow. That's great. I think you mentioned that when you went the 10th anniversary of the OAU. I mean, that was the time when Pan-Africanism, was a common thing that people were talking about, that particular
Right,
point. I'm just
right.
curious. Yeah, I'm just curious, like, then, I mean, like, what was kind of the excitement then? People talking about Pan-Africanism, did it feel like, they saw something bigger or, like, do you feel like it is disappointed, since then and compared to now? I'm just curious, huh?
Well, that's a very good question. A lot of things have happened, good and bad, because we're dealing with people.
Yeah,
But I think that the dream of Pan Africanism, which was Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere and Haile Selassie dream,
yes,
um, is inching closer. But at that time, people were coming out of colonialism,
yes.
and it was only because Haile Selassie did not have an arms embargo that he
Yeah.
could buy more weapons than he needed until the Americans stopped selling him weapons because they said you had enough. Because they gotten sort of onto his game because he would buy more weapons than he needed. And
Yeah.
he would bring all the freedom fighters into Ethiopia and his army would train them
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and then would send them back out with weapons.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
single-handedly, he armed the continent of liberation fighters.
Of liberation fighters. Yeah. 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 I remember I'm from Zimbabwe myself. I mean, at that particular point, Zimbabwe was still a colony or was still sort of, under the African rule as well at that particular point.
Mhm.
And, just, I mean, I was just like kind of looking through how Ethiopia, ended up sort of contributing to what made Africa today. That
Right.
even if almost many African countries adopted a flag that had Ethiopian colors. You know,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Because they adopted the history and they adopted not only the history, but they adopted the active participation in their liberation.
yeah, yeah,
That it
yeah.
was Selassie underwriting the costs for them to fight.
To fight, yeah. I was looking at your pictures. I mean, you took pictures of Haile Selassie. Like, I was like, I mean, this was a guy that at least at that particular point was bigger than life.
Right.
I'm just curious, like, how did you manage to do that? And like, how did you got closer to somebody who many people thought he was divine? Like, and what that experience was like.
Well, it's interesting because I had I was attracted. I didn't know anything about Haile Selassie,
Yeah,
except all of this stuff I learned as I went along.
yeah,
But what I was attracted to was a sense of otherworldness about him as a spirit.
yeah.
He exuded something that was quite interesting I'd never seen before, I'd never
Hmm.
experienced before. He was a very small man in stature, but
Yeah,
he had something about his presence that exuded something that was really large. Give you an example. My first time I saw him,
yeah,
I was at the airport and different heads of states were arriving.
Yeah.
And I'm in a corral with the rest of the press, and
Yeah.
I've got a long lens. And I noticed there was a group of people start walking towards a podium.
Mhm.
But it was something strange about this group because there were four men that I saw, but the power that was emanating
Yeah.
was not coming from them.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until they stopped at the podium and the guy stepped up a few steps above him that it was this little short guy.
Yeah.
And this little short guy had this presence about him that was just, he was like, I'm here with you and this is all mine, but I'm there with them too, whoever that could be above us.
Yeah.
So I did something that I don't use, that I never did before as a photographer. You know, as a photographer, you look through the camera, you make your pictures.
Yeah.
But I decided to drop the camera and just look at it,
Wow.
to burn it into my consciousness. What is this?
Yo, wow.
And then doing that, when he finally left, I turned around, I said, well, who was that? And he said, it was the emperor. So, oh, it was the emperor, okay. I knew this guy was different. Whoever he was very different.
Yeah.
So for that whole week of the AOU, I was see him, you know, when being with the press, as he would make his possessions some different plenary sessions to others, or come and visit from the palace to Africa Hall.
Yeah.
And then that picture that I use of him, the picture
Yeah.
you see on my website,
Yeah.
is the last picture I made of him addressing African Union in Africa, not African Union, the OAU in Africa Hall.
OAU, yeah, that person, yeah. Wow, wow. Well, that's very interesting story that, you know, you bumped into, you know, this, you know, in those particular times, this great man, without actually having, you know, planned for it in many ways.
Right, had no plan, had no idea.
Oh, wow. So that's sort of, you know, thinking of, I think I saw you also took pictures of Nelson Mandela as well.
Yep. Well, Nelson Mandela, I made pictures of him in Stockholm, because I was on my way to photograph the birth of a nation in Namibia.
Yeah.
Because I photographed the freedom fighters when they were fighting and living in the States.
Yeah.
So I went to Stockholm because on my way, because I wanted to visit Oliver Tambo, who was recovering from surgery.
Yeah.
And I get to this place.
Great man, yeah.
And who opens the door but Winnie Mandela? And I'm like, what is this about? You know, why aren't you, I'm like, in my mind, why aren't you in South Africa? What's going on? And then I go down the hall and she says, well, you know, Nelson is down the hall with Oliver. So, oh, okay. Had I known, I would have brought a flash.
Oh,
you know,
wow.
and had more light.
Yeah.
Because the room was kind of, you know, it was not, you know, it's not the perfect lighting situation. But, you know, being trained with how to push photography, how to push film and you know, and hold that roll apart and stuff, I was able to make those photographs of him and Oliver Tambo. And that's the picture that I put on my website.
Of Nelson Mandela. Well, that's interesting how sort of accidental some of these things are happening, you know.
And then he came to America.
Yeah.
After he went to visit Fidel Castro. Because if it wasn't for Fidel Castro, South Africa would not have been liberated.
Yeah, Fidel Castro really helped a lot in liberating South Africa, quite a lot.
Well, he liberated Angola first.
Yes.
And then liberated Namibia. And only because his troops had defeated Savimbi and had defeated the South African troops.
Yes.
And they were now heading to the South African border, did the South Africans realize that, hey, we have got to do something. Because we already have an army that's on retreat. Yeah. And if the Cubans, if we don't do anything to stop the Cubans, then the whole country would go up in smoke. It was not the ANC. It was the Cubans.
I mean, even the ANC had to go and train in the places where where Fidel Castro had sort of helped to create a space for that to happen. Right. So there was a really great help. I remember Nelson Mandela when I think probably around the same time or so, he went to America, and then he was in this town hall, you know, being questioned about his relationship with Fidel Castro at that particular point. You know, I remember him saying, you know, your enemies, you know, should not be our enemies. You know, that, you know, like, you know, Fidel Castro had been quite helpful in many ways to liberate.
He was our friend when you were our enemy.
Yeah, which was quite true. You know, I mean, I definitely want to jump in some of the ordinary life pictures that you took, but I just wanted to sort of start with some of these pictures of people who are bigger than life that you took. I think the other one was Bob Marley. Let me see if I can pull up that picture of, showing a picture of, you took this picture of Bob Marley, if you can see it. Yeah.
Yep. That was his next to his final concert. It was the last
final
concert.
I mean, it's interesting how special some of these moments are, at least some of the last moments first, and then I think you also took a picture of him in a casket.
Yep. And then I went, and then also in when they entombed him as well. I went to see Marley to photograph him in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And the day I arrived, he leaves for Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
I missed him. I sat in his chair in Tough Gong to hear his latest thing that was getting ready. He was going to drop next. I think it's "Could You Be Loved."
Oh, wow.
So I had done the picture in the concert. I went to photograph him at Tough Gong, and he had left to Zimbabwe. So only thing I could do was his burial.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Marley's visit to Zimbabwe has remained something that very monumental in the country. Even the music scene in Zimbabwe has shifted, changed, like reggae or dancehall, which is sort of like coming out of reggae and stuff. Like reggae really became a big genre in Zimbabwean music. So Bob Marley coming to Zimbabwe, I mean, I wasn't there yet, but it's something that is well remembered as something that was great. I mean, going back to the idea again of Pan-Africanism, I felt like Bob Marley played a huge role as well.
Huge role.
A huge role. Yeah.
He is, and I think that conscious African Americans are Pan-Africanists by nature.
Yes.
And I say that because we don't really know where we come from in West Africa, so we don't have the continental jealousies that continentals have with each other. So I think that we tend to see ourselves more as a embracive. We embrace all of Africa rather than a particular part.
I'm just curious on the idea of consciousness that you raised. I think one of your interviews, I think you mentioned something about if you don't know who you are, then you have to know who you are to achieve excellence in some way. So I'm just curious, like, what's the importance of consciousness, or where do you think we are today in terms of for Africans on the continent or Africans in diaspora, like in terms of this consciousness that you're referring to? Like, what do you think we are right now?
Well, that's a good question, because there's political consciousness, there's economic consciousness, there's social consciousness, there's belief consciousness. I think that we are waking up from a long sleep. And as we wake up from that long sleep, I think we have to then develop a new paradigm that works for us.
Yeah.
The worst thing that afflicts us is the fact that our defenses have been broken.
Yeah.
And the people who conquered us have no reason to respect us.
Yeah.
And that has caused a crisis in confidence of whether or not we can really redesign ourselves to become a force to be reckoned with for ourselves and for our enemies.
Yeah.
The first step of that, I think, is in that redefinition or reimagining ourselves is also, I think, fundamentally is reimagining our self-worth and our worthiness of being here.
Yes.
And worthiness of being here has to go back to defining our relationship with a God that looks like us and acts in our behalf.
Yeah.
That's not to say I'm anti-Christian, but Christianity is the grandchild of African divinity. African divinity, if you want to know African divinity, you have to understand and appreciate ancient Egyptian divinity.
Yeah.
Ancient Egypt gave us African gods, gave us African cosmology, gave us African philosophy and moral behavior. In fact, the Ten Commandments come straight out of ancient Egyptian belief systems.
Yeah.
And they also gave us a political and military system that protected us.
Yeah.
It's very hard if the white man is oppressing you. It's very hard to believe that the same white man is going to save you when you die.
That's true. That's true. That's a very hard thing to actually that's a thing that we struggle with, Like
and until we can overcome that, we are compromised.
Yeah.
Because by absorbing that belief system without realizing that it's a corruption of our own belief system,
yes,
and reimagining it and redefining it for us, will always you don't have to put us in jail, or you don't have to put us in chains physically if the Bible puts us in chains emotionally.
That's correct. That's really powerful in many ways. It's I think I definitely want to talk more on African spirituality. I think before we jump onto African spirituality, which I really want to learn more from you. You mentioned the idea of reimagining ourselves. I think this was one of the themes that the Harlem Renaissance, which happened in America, in the early on, that was one of the things that they were trying to do, like how the blacks, especially those who had come out of slavery, and those who descendants, those descendants, those people who have been in slavery, like how do you imagine yourself if you have been lied to all your life? You want, you are savages, or that's like, how do you reimagine yourself? And I'm just curious, like, what's your view on that, and how that is shifted, evolved until today, especially for the African Americans as a whole, like, from the Harlem Renaissance through art, through photography, or through film, and how that has sort of evolved until today.
Well, I also have to say, there was a negritude movement in the Francophone world at the same time that the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And then we had, great thinkers like W.B. Du Bois.
Yes.
We also had great activists like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And as well as a continental Kwame Nkrumah and Haile Selassie.
Yeah.
The problem, I think that first of all, it takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
And most people who see themselves as victims, courage is not something that is the first thing that comes to their mind. Mm-hmm. So being politicized and being woke, as the young people call it, is a place to keep working for. And that's what I do, and a lot of other people do it as well.
Yeah.
And we touch people. You can't touch everybody, but no society or revolution has ever been led by the masses. It's always been spearheaded by people who had enough clarity that the masses, half of the masses will follow them, and the other half could be compromised.
Yeah.
But it's an ongoing thing. I think that there are a lot of growing pains. I think it's good that the first growing pain is Africans understanding how to rule themselves.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the African Americans, how to see themselves outside of the context where they're always reacting against their oppressor. But how do you respond to yourself and respond to a vision of what you want to become that has nothing to do with your oppressor?
With the oppressor, yeah. So do you think there's going to be a time that Africans or African Americans, African of any diaspora, there's going to be a time where we can do things without really thinking about the oppressor in many ways? Like, I think W. Du Bois, when he cited, he's talking about this idea of double consciousness, where, you are aware that, you live in a white world as well as, on the other hand, you are a black person, and there is also this difficulty of living in that world, so do you,
That's what Black Lives Matter is trying to fight. The whole idea that black skin is a crime.
Yeah.
It's one step at a time. And to read, not only to redefine ourselves, but also force the larger white society to accept that redefinition. Now, I think that in, say, when Martin Luther King's time, there was only so many whites who were supporting Martin Luther King, and a lot of blacks did not support him.
That's correct. Do you know why?
Most blacks did not support him.
Did not support him.
Because they were afraid. They were afraid. And fear is a real problem with anybody. Fear is a problem with the Irish and the English.
Yeah.
Fear is a problem with Australia in the English. Fear is a major problem. But one step at a time. You know how you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
One bite at a time until you finish the whole elephant.
Until you finish.
I see.
So,
so would you think, like, I think the Black Panther Party, after, MLK and, Malcolm X, they seem to have less fear in many ways,
less what?
They didn't seem so much afraid, at least the Black Panther Party, like
they didn't seem afraid, and they were annihilated.
Yeah.
And the same thing is, and now, it may be harder to annihilate us, but we have mass incarceration.
That's another way. That's another way.
Which is another way of trying to, there's always going to be a way to, and until we get enough political power of people who are woke,
yes,
to change laws and to get allies. There are more white allies now who understand our problem.
Yeah.
They understand systemic racism.
Yeah.
And they are getting over the fact that, yes, half of white Americans have been convinced that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group. And half of white Americans—
there's a group of that who believe that,
And there's another group of half Americans who believe that, when you have demonstrations, what's going to point to us is if there's violence. And then this time, the violence was caused by white provocateurs. And they were, and then people videotaped them and exposed them. So that when you have peaceful rallies, the media doesn't want to talk about it. So now you have policemen who come in and attack the peaceful people, and then accuse them of being violent against them, so that it fits into that narrative again to delegitimize the people of African descent, their voice for being worthy.
Yeah. I mean, sort of like, I think, speaking of how the media, sort of plays a role in this. And from what I find out, I think you worked for the New York Times for like 40 years or so, taking photographs. I'm just curious, like, during that time, what do you think was one particular thing you changed in forcing, using your words, the white Americans or the white community overall into accepting this redefinition that the Blacks of themselves are giving out? Like, I'm curious, what do you think you achieved in that particular way through your photography in many ways?
Well, I think many. My whole reason for being a photographer is to rebrand Blackness.
Yeah.
There are three major issues that are missing when outsiders photograph us.
Yeah.
Are the issues of decency, dignity, and virtuous character.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, because I realized you talk a lot about those things, like how most of the photographies that to be taken of Africans, it doesn't usually contain those things.
They can't see it. It's below their radar. So my thing was working at the Times meant that the Times has credibility and it has an audience of decision makers. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that whenever I had to photograph people of color, I was sympathetic towards these people. Yes. Because I know that subconsciously, when you look at the pictures, that registers. People may not know what's coming at them, but if it's subconsciously, it's coming through my images, it's coming through an organ that they have been socialized to trust. Yeah. So therefore, I have an advantage. Yeah. So I made sure that for 25 years, there was a Kwanzaa picture that deals with African civilization. I made sure that when I photographed Black people, that I did not even if they were in bad situations, I made sure that I did not sacrifice their humanity.
Yeah, their humanity.
Humanity. Yes. On what I call the orders of their condition. Yeah. Just because you're poor doesn't mean that you're not somebody.
That's very true.
Just because you're struggling does not mean that you're not some mother's child.
That's very true.
Having empathy, having sympathy, having understanding, that's what my photographs are about. So then, and if you look at my 40 years of work, that's what my pictures show. One of my mentors, Gordon Parks, I told him this is what I wanted to change this image. Yeah. And Gordon, and I was freelancing before I started with the Times. He said, Chester, if that's what you feel, I agree with you. He says there's 36 pictures on a roll.
Yeah.
Make sure that you make all 36 positive, because if you make 35 positive and the last one is negative, that's the one they're going to use.
They're gonna use that. That's very true. They really want to. They love using those demeaning pictures of Africans. You know,
It's their socialization. It's how they've been socialized.
that's true. You know, you can give them multiple pictures, but they're just gonna go for that one, which is gonna be showing very negative. Yeah.
And sometimes you have to fight. I remember a time when Ambassador Andrew Young was fired for talking to Palestinians. And they had a picture of him leaving the White House, shot by a photographer at night in the back of a car. He looked like an escaping thief. So, so one of my editors, who was quite racist himself, wanted to run that picture on the front page. And I said, well, don't we have another picture? He said, no, that's the picture we're using. So I took that picture. I did something I've never done before, but I went to the man who had hired me, the managing editor of the New York Times. I went to his office, asked the secretary to see him. I went in, I showed him the picture. I said, look, we don't do this with any of our ambassadors. We shouldn't do it with this one either.
Yeah.
He said, you're right. He said, let me go see what else they have. He went with me back to the desk where that editor said, no, we're not going to use it. He picked another picture. He told him, use this picture.
Wow.
So that's my lesson about why it's important to be on the inside. I'd rather be on the inside arguing at the table than be on a picket line with placards and posters the day after.
Yeah. That's one thing. I mean, I'm also all for rebranding blackness in many ways, and then, but there's, the reimagining ourselves, which we talked about earlier. Sometimes, I wonder, which one should be more important in a sense, because in most cases, there are blacks who take part in those, some people take part as models, some people take part as in taking those pictures. Like they themselves are deciding, raising their hand that they're going to be taking a picture in that particular angle, and they never raise their hand to say, no, this is wrong. Like how do we communicate this, or what do you think is the problem? Why are there other Africans who are willing to be shown in this particular way?
Self-hate is a strong thing.
Yeah.
Self-hate is a strong thing.
Yeah.
So, if someone is captured by self-hate, it's pretty hard to change them. And that requires a lot of talking and showing them. And sometimes, you could start with, look, have you seen this kind of picture? Have you seen that kind of picture? Sometimes it's just things beyond their imagination.
Or they never really see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a choice. You can either character assassinate them by condemning them, or you can say, well, have you seen this book? Have you seen these pictures? Have you seen this website? Take a look. Tell me what you think about that. What that photographer does. Wow. Do you think that you can do something like that too? You have to back up and not be confrontational, but try to be suggestive in a way that that maybe, hey, you may enjoy this, you may appreciate this, you may not. If it's not, don't worry about it. If you do, tell me what you think.
Yeah, I think that's
because you have to drop knowledge on people very, sparsely and gradually. You can't do it like that. You got to, drip, drip, drip.
Drip, drip, not just throw everything on there.
No, you can't do that. You got to back up, and you got to be patient. You got to drip, drip, drip.
That's a very good advice for me. Sometimes I get too less patient, and I'm like, yo, man, this is just crazy. You could have pick up your pace. You got to
use and you also have to learn how to use metaphors.
Yeah.
And stories. As a teaching, because it's a teaching moment. As said, and in such a way that you don't question the person's intelligence. You have to come and say, look, you have to tell yourself that I think, this is bottom line in a sense. I think people every day are doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
If they knew what you knew and I knew, they would change. So the issue is, how do you get them to know and learn what you and I know? Because you have to have the faith in the knowledge that the knowledge will change them.
That's a very great advice. That's a very great advice. I think that's it will take slightly longer, but is probably more effective, because the other one will just push them out.
50%. Hey, it's 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing.
Of nothing. That's very true. That's very true. That's really true. Because yeah, it's something that I've been personally struggling with, trying to figure out how I balance that, especially when it comes to educating people, as well as them picking up the pace and be able to actually reimagine themselves later. Because you spend like 2 hours somebody explaining to them some time, and then the next day you see them in an image which is so demeaning. I'm like, why did you do that?
Tell them to look at my website and tell me what's different.
Have
them look at the website and say, have you seen pictures like this before?
Yeah. That's
where, and where have you seen the pictures? Because they're lying. But say, where have you seen pictures like this before? How do you think he was able to make that?
Yeah. I mean, speaking of your pictures, let me see if I can, we can get, some of the pictures here that I think, I just want to, you to walk us through some of the pictures you. Okay, 1 second. There it is. Here, I think this was in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
One boy, one girl. What's in there? What's in there? I mean, for me, this picture, it carries so much. I mean, it carries so much emotion, so much feeling. Like, it's something that I can be proud to put out there. Instead of those, the most well-known picture perhaps of a kid with a fly, or with that bird, the vulture which wanted to eat. No, it's totally different.
Yeah, right. Totally different.
Yeah. So
because there again, I'm not sacrificing the people's humanity on the altars of their condition. They don't live in the penthouses, but they're still people. But the other thing I did is that I don't objectify, I don't sexualize, and in this case. In my pictures in Ethiopia, we're dealing with people who have bare breasts. I challenge you to find what a breast are.
Yeah,
because I organize them in such a way that I don't give the opportunity for that sort of gaga-ness.
It's not sexualized, even in the picture. Yeah, even in the picture you took, you're not sexualizing them. Which is powerful in many ways, because taking pictures, a lot of people, if you just tell them to go and take those pictures, they either do it in two ways, whether sexualize the breast or treat them as savages. Like the camera itself is treating that person as a savage. You can feel it.
I call that objectifying.
Yeah.
So I have to say something to you, innocent. I know it's normal for people to say, take pictures. Most people may take pictures, but I don't take pictures. I make pictures.
You make pictures, right? Yeah, I think I saw that. Like, can you explain to what is the making of pictures versus the taking of pictures?
Well, because I'm consciously looking at the subject. I'm looking at the history. I'm looking at the consciousness, in my political consciousness, the social consciousness, as well as my aesthetic consciousness. So all of these things are coming into play. They're overlaying each other. So I am, yes, I'm seeing what is happening in front of me, but I have a mission about how I approach it, and that's what I call making it.
I see. Well, that's something thought-provoking, really. Thinking of it, as making a picture. On the other hand, I feel like you are making pictures as well as the other person who is objectifying, because they're not just taking things as they are. Like, they are literally, with all their ideology, they are making it something.
They are projecting.
They're projecting their own.
They're projecting. They're projecting their misunderstanding.
And usually when I look at that picture, I'm like, this picture has nothing to do with the people they've captured. It has everything to do with their own ideologies.
Well, that's why I say a photograph never lies about the photographer.
It tells a lot about the photographer, actually, than the people who are appearing in the picture.
Right.
It's really something that I've been thinking about, like how photographers can actually remove themselves from all these imagines they have. And is it possible though to not to as a photographer to actually make these pictures in a way that would again decency, dignity, character, everything in there that captures the context? Is it something that is easy, or is something that takes a lot of effort? And how can other people who are struggling with that get to that particular point?
Well, people project their inadequacies easily onto other people. And people not everybody feels very secure in themselves.
Yeah.
You have to love yourself and feel secure in yourself in order to accept another
Another
person's
person. So
agency.
yeah.
So if you don't have a sense of agency, you can't accept it, and you can't see it in somebody else,
Somebody
and
else. Yes.
you can't accept it in somebody else.
Yeah. So there's this
So when
insecurity.
the photographer exposing how little agency they have about themselves, how little depth of their humanity they
Of
have.
their own humanity. Yeah. So it says a
So
lot. Yeah.
it says a lot. I go and I look at pictures. When I look at pictures, I'm looking directly into the photographer's head. What's in front of me, what the appearance, that's secondary. I'm looking right into their head. They
Yeah.
don't realize how much they're exposing themselves. It's, it's like having a psychological briefing, and they've
Yeah.
given all the information.
I see. Yeah, this, I think there was one of your pictures that, sort of caught my eye. It's sort of like the picture, call it the Milky Way.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me get that. That one. I mean, there's two of them, which are sort of,
I know the two, yeah.
yeah. Like, how did you take this picture? And, sort of like, you are somewhere sort of underground of some sort, Yeah.
Yeah, on this picture, I made it 600. I'm on a mountain that's 8,600 feet above sea level.
Above sea level, yeah.
And then there's another mountain that's about a mile away from me with a very wide angle lens. So it gives it that effect that you're looking out of a tunnel. And here I'm at 7,400 feet above sea level,
yeah,
looking, and these mountains here are probably about 20 miles away.
I see.
But it took me a few years before I could make this picture. I wanted to make the picture because the Egyptians believed that the Milky Way was a reflection of the Nile.
Okay.
It was a Nile in the heavens.
Huh?
So in reading their belief system, I wanted to show this. So I had to learn how to do astrophotography. I had to buy a telescope. I had to learn the night sky.
Yeah.
I had to learn what things were. And then I had to learn how to photograph them, and then learn the particular method of how do you make nighttime pictures, because you have to do 5 of the exact thing, and then you have to do it before the earth moves. The earth moves a mile every 15 seconds. And then you have to, in post-production, you have to layer those to bring out the depth and everything and the colors. It took years to do, but I did it because in my study of Egyptology, I knew how the Egyptians felt about this. And I wanted to do a book that looks at how Egyptian religion is the basis of all Western religion, even though the Westerners plagiarized it and then turned around and demonized the very people they plagiarized.
Yes. Wow. So on African spirituality, as you sort of get into that, I mean, you say Egypt was a place that sort of got back to most of that. I'm just curious. Like, if you have looked at it historically, what was this place of African spirituality? Or first, how would you define what African spirituality is? At least for somebody who doesn't have an idea.
It's about recognizing nature. My question to people who want to be religious and who have a God is that, well, tell me, what religion does God follow?
Yeah, that's a very legit question. Have you gotten any answers on that before?
Well, I think the Egyptians understood it well. They followed the forces of nature. That's why the sun was very important to them, because they didn't believe, as Christianity tried to marginalize it, they didn't believe the sun was God. They believed that the force behind the sun was God, that the sun was merely the window into the residence of God. Then as you study astronomy, you realize that God is way out past our system, solar system, past. So that the energy of the spirit that makes everything is invisible and is far away from us, and it's not human-centric. It's all about nature. So the other African religions, if you study African religion, it can be confusing if you don't know Egyptian religion. But if you know Egyptian religion, you realize that this is a quote of the same beliefs, but in an illiterate culture, people took segments of it with them,
Yeah.
conceptual segments, and they renamed them and rate for their localities. But
Yeah.
if you try to make sense of those localities, you get confused. But if you understand and study Egyptian religion, then it all becomes clear.
I see. So when you say Egyptian religions, is it the religions of the Egyptians we see today or some different Egyptians?
The Egyptians we see today are not ancient Egyptians. They are not the African people. These are conquerors who came in the 6th century. The Arabs who came after the Mohammedans. These are not the Egyptians.
So can we find
the Nubians are the Egyptians.
Yeah.
But Egypt is a civilization that lasted 5,000 years.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good record.
Yeah.
No civilization has lasted that long.
Has lasted, yeah.
And then Egypt, because of the belief system they had, invented everything theological you can think about is an Egyptian invention. The word soul, the word spirit, heaven. Egypt invented heaven, which means there's a long queue line. And I'm sorry to say that the Abrahamics are very long, very far back in that queue.
Yeah.
We just ran across a queue 100 years ago. We ran across a traveler, King Tut, on his way to eternity. And he had been already traveling for 2,500 years.
Yeah.
In high style, I must say.
Yeah.
In his tomb of eternity. And the Abrahamic people are just starting off.
Yeah.
And so I hate to think that if there is a gate that they get to, I think it'd be a side entrance.
Yeah. Beside the entrance, yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to sort of focus on, I think, which we also mentioned earlier, is the idea of canceling hate through photography. Like, would you explain what that is? Like, how do you cancel? I mean, especially in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement right now. So I'm just curious, like, how and what it is, like, canceling hate through.
It's soft, it's soft influence. It's realizing how the mind works and trying to, because see, the mind is influenced by the eye. We have 5 senses.
Mm-hmm.
The eye is the only sense that can do all the other 4.
Yeah.
The mouth, you can taste something, but you can't see it.
You can't see it.
You can hear something, you can imagine what it looks like, but you can smell something and imagine what it looks like. But the eye can smell for you, it can taste for you, it can hear for you. You see a picture of a steak frying, you can hear the sizzle. You can smell the steak. You see somebody 40 feet, 100 feet away from you, out of sound reach, and somebody is shooting somebody else. You can feel it. Your body will recoil if you see it.
Yeah.
So the eye has the ability to affect the mind more than any other sense.
Because photography,
Through photography. That's why propaganda, visual propaganda, is so effective.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Leni Riefenstahl's films?
Yeah. The German lady, right? The one that did the Nazi films, as well as some films in Sudan as well. Yeah.
Powerful visual
It was powerful.
The whole idea with visuals is to try to snatch somebody's consciousness.
Yeah.
If you can create visuals that snatch their consciousness, or burns in their consciousness, or won't let their memory go, then you've succeeded in making an image that really matters.
Yeah.
So I try to make those images.
Wow. So should we get Africans, or other historically disenfranchised, oppressed groups to pick up the cameras and take pictures of themselves, or what should be like?
Well, I've been encouraging that, and there are a lot of Africans who are doing that. They were having this Addis Ababa photo festival. They have a Lagos photos festival.
Yes.
It's an act of empowerment that you do not have to wait to be defined by an outsider, by your enemy. You can define yourself.
Yeah.
And then do it so much that it reaches a critical mass that it overpowers. If in the beginning it pushes back, and your goal is to eventually overpower what's coming.
Yeah.
So that it just so you are not controlled by it, and you have an effect on the person who's trying to push this stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really powerful. And how is in terms of the festivals, photo festival that has been happening at least across Africa, has there been any measurable change in how the people view themselves within Africa? And
I see it. You also have the French one that started out in Bamako too. But yeah, I see it. I see it on Instagram a lot, where you have the Nigerians who have always been very forceful and visually, but the Nigerians, the Senegalese, the Malians, and the Ethiopians and the Ghanaians, they're all stepping up. People are producing a lot of beautiful stuff, a lot of strong stuff. People are discovering their agency in their images, and if you start following them on Instagram, you'll see it. And in New York, at the New York Times, I see these, I look at the bylines of stuff that I like, and it tend to always be an African.
Yeah.
The African-American photographer is not as, we're still a lot of people, we're still captured by our fear. But I love it when I see the continental Africans, step up and just jump right into it, because they don't feel that they have to get permission. The ones who are doing it. But people who feel they have to get permission from the overlord, from the overseer, their images will always, be inadequate. But those who are not asking for permission, they give themselves agency. They jump into it. It's beautiful to see.
Wow. So it's sort of as we're sort of wrapping this up, I'm just curious on the the African diaspora, be it Haiti or Jamaica. Oh, my friend said I should say Jamaica. Okay.
I'll make you.
Yeah. So I'm curious on the sort of wrapping up on the idea of consciousness, awareness, and being able to have to assert your own agency in many ways. Is there, like, you feel like there is a difficulty, at least for the African diaspora, given that they have had an overseer of some sort, who is sort of...
There is great difficulty, but because ideas flow, are beginning to flow more. I mean, they flow, and then there's a backlash, and people get out of the fear. Could I tell you that most African Americans can recite or have a knowledge of the speeches of Malcolm X or books of Malcolm X? No.
Oh, okay.
But those who do, mostly first of all, are college educated people.
Yes.
But just because you go to college, unless you look for Black study classes or African history classes or political classes, you may not get that either. So, there's always going to be, but there is a proportion. That proportion obviously is growing. When I look at literature that Black writers are making, Black people in the diaspora, the Western-born, I would call them the Western-born Africans, are trying to overcome trauma, systemic trauma from the shadow of enslavement and how it's affected our DNA.
Yes.
There's a percentage of those who have gone further, and they are politically clear and economically clear about the situation on another level and how to address it.
Yes.
Those people now finding that they can get involved politically, locally, that national elections are one thing, but local elections are also important, and that they can then start writing policy. They are part of congressional staffs, which is how at the beginning and getting in that. They're working their way into the river. They're coming down the stream, working their way into the river. And my idea is that I want African American politically to support Africa the way Jewish Americans support Israel. And that is little by little, people working together, getting in that river. That's why I did that book, Feeling the Spirit, which looked at the African diaspora, to try to show that emotionally, we're all the same people. Because African Americans have been shamed into their denying their Africanness, as though they appeared some miraculously out of some cloud. But these are issues that people have to deal with. So that was my contribution to that.
to
My
that. Yes,
Kwanzaa pictures each year is for my contribution to that.
I see
And
it.
I continue to contribute to that. And when I speak out, I talk about my people,
Yeah,
which is a very new concept for African Americans. You know, to
yeah,
talk about inclusive ownership and groupthink.
yeah.
But you know, if it was an easy fight, we wouldn't be talking.
That's true. That's true. It's not. It's not. It's not really. You know, speaking of the fight, you know, just as we wrap this up, I'm curious, what would be your advice to three type of young people? One, you know, a continental African kid, you know, in terms of, you know, these reimagining yourselves and how they're going to have to come out. And then the second one being, you know, an African, you know, in the diaspora, like African American or British. And three, you know, an African in the diaspora in the Caribbean, like, you know, the Haiti, you know, Martinique or Jamaica. Like, I'm curious, what would be your advice for these three types of young, you know, maybe 9-year-olds of some sort, you know, who are growing up? You know, I'm just curious, what would be your advice?
You have to expose them to African.
Yeah.
You have to expose them to the best of Africa.
Yeah.
That's what the Europeans do. We see what they think are their best films, their best records.
Yes.
We have to search out what are the good stories. We have to search out the good examples that make you proud. Because we know the European is pushing things that will not make you proud. We have to boast. Everybody wants to be better. Everybody wants their condition to be better. They want to say strive to be better. You have to give them ammunition that greatness is a African possibility.
Yeah.
Somebody is doing something of worth and note that is worth paying attention to. One day that may be an example for you. That in spite of the odds, you know, the greater the limitations, the more creative you have to become to overcome them.
Yes, yes, yes.
But you have faith in your ability to do it.
Yeah.
And having faith in a person when you're talking to them, when you're trying to reach them, is more important than what you say. If the person can feel that you understand them and you know there's a deficit, but you have the faith that they have the ability to pull it off, that makes a whole big difference in the world.
Wow. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the time. I really learned a lot. I'm hoping a lot more people are going to quite learn a lot from this. Thanks so much.
Okay, my pleasure. And then keep enjoying my website.
Yes, definitely. I'm going to direct people to the website. So that people can learn more, see empowering images, images that I hope, and I hope Africans of all kinds, continental and the diaspora, when they watch, they look at them, they get a sense of how to, to reimagine themselves, how to present themselves in many ways. It's really empowering. It's really empowering.
And did I give you my Instagram address as well?
You can probably say it, but I can find it.
Mr. Higgins 12.
Okay, definitely. Okay, thanks so much. I will find it. I'll put it over on the link.
Good, and good luck to your work. Congratulations on what you're doing. You're doing a wonderful job. Keep it up.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's very encouraging. Thanks so much.
Good.
All right. Okay. All right. See you.
Okay. Great.